Hello. Hi, we're with Captain Matlu of the San Jose Fire Department, and he's going to tell us a bit about what it's like to be a firefighter. So, Captain Matlu, would you like to start off with telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been in emergency services now. This August will be 39 years for me in emergency services. I've been a paramedic for 34 years. Been in the fire service for 25 years now.
Awesome. So that probably gives you a lot of experience to tell us about what are some of the goals of the fire service and emergency services career in general.
Well, anybody in public safety or public service, their goal is to help somebody else who's having the worst day of their life and make it better. That puts it in the simplest terms.
Awesome. So going on to the next question, how would you describe the work-life experience of a normal firefighter?
Well, in order to be a normal firefighter, you don't do anything normally. So about 80% of what the modern fire service does is emergency medicine. So you have to be medically trained somehow. You're going to see people having disease, you're going to see people with injuries, and then you're going to have the good calls, the ones where they deliver a baby and everybody's happy and healthy, and those calls happen. That's about 80% of your life as a firefighter. The rest of it is fighting fires, both in structures and automobiles and vegetation, hazardous materials calls, rescues, and then pretty much anything else where you need help, but you don't know who to call, and the police are not the right person to call, they call the fire department. Now, you asked about what's normal. The normal daily life of a firefighter usually starts a half hour, 45 minutes before they're supposed to be at the station. They get to the station, they're talking to the person that they're relieving, they're finding out what happened, what equipment is broken, what's going on in the station, the news, that sort of thing. Then they put their equipment on the rig and they check the part of the rig that they're responsible for. Once they're ready to respond on an emergency call of any kind, then they have to clean the station. We don't have janitors, we do our own cleaning. Then you might go grocery shopping because you have to eat. Then somebody has to cook. At some point during the morning, you're probably going to be doing some training because every day we train for something. And then you'll eat lunch, or at least you hope so, before you get another call. And all amongst this, you're running calls. Some of our stations run as many as 30 calls in a 24-hour shift. So you may not have a normal day because you're going from call to call. But that's what it's like to be a firefighter.
All right. I think that gives everyone a rough understanding of how your day goes. So kind of what kind of part of that day drew you to become a firefighter or join emergency services in general?
Well, that started back in 1969, believe it or not. I was watching a TV show about cops. And they saved a baby that wasn't breathing. And I told my parents I wanted to do that because I wanted to save babies that weren't breathing. And that was the start.
Awesome. So going off of that, what characteristics or like educational background would you say the fire service is looking for in a candidate?
Okay. It's not just educational, but education is a piece of it. So in high school, because the audience for this interview is high school students, you want to focus on a few different classes. Number one, mathematics. Why do you need mathematics? Because math is necessary for a lot of what we do as firefighters, both on the medicine side and on the firefighting side. And you need to have a good foundation of math in order to understand some of the science you need to know. So study math. Don't give up on the math. Study the math. You want to study science, biology, anatomy, chemistry. You can't understand the chemistry of fire if you don't understand a little chemistry. Physics, you got to know that heat rises, that gases that are denser than air are going to sink to the ground, and gases that are lighter than air are going to float away. So math and science. What about language? It's very important to speak English well, but it's just as important to be able to speak other languages well. Think about the community you live in. How many people are in households where English was not the first language spoken in that household? And then think about how many languages there are. 2 years ago, 51 different languages were used by the 911 receivers, the dispatchers, from the translation service. 51 different languages, not 51 times, 51 different languages in the almost 100,000 calls they dispatched on. Okay? So it's really important that you speak a second language. Physical fitness. And this is the one where I was probably the least prepared when I became a firefighter. But it's very important to be physically fit. When you get dressed to fight a high-rise fire, you weigh 100 pounds more than you did when you started. Then you have to climb the stairs to get to the fire. If it's on the roof of a 20-story building, you just climb 20 stories. And then it's time to go to work. But you climb those 100 stories carrying 100 pounds of extra weight. So physical fitness is very important. And then learning how to be a member of a team. And that doesn't mean you have to be in a team sport, although that's one way to do it. You could be in theater, because the cast and the crew of a theatrical production is a team. The team has a goal. Each person in the team has a job. So you have to learn to function as part of a team. And those are the things you need to study in high school. And on top of that, you got to do all of that without getting into trouble. Because if you get into a whole bunch of trouble, we can't use you as a firefighter. Okay?
Yeah, I think you pointed out some really good points, and something I didn't realize before was the language aspect. And thinking about that, that makes a lot of sense. And another
Let me ask you, do you speak any languages other than English?
I understand Hindi, which is my mother tongue, and then I also speak and understand Spanish. And I know a lot.
Muy importante que puedas hablar español, porque hay mucha gente aquí en San José que pueden hablar solamente el español, ¿sí?
Sí.
Okay. And I don't speak any Hindi at all, so you're one up on me.
That's like a trait of America. Since we're a nation of immigrants, you always expect to hear some other language. And I think adding on to what you were saying earlier, just my little education in the fire services, from the initial 360 when you get to a scene to communicating with other firefighters who might arrive later, developing those communication skills in high school, I think is also really important.
Yes.
Moving on to the next question. How would you say this career has changed you as a person?
How has it changed me as a person? Well, there's a couple of different ways. I've seen a lot of tragedy, more than most people. I was at the Oakland Hills fire. I was at the Cypress structure after the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. I was in the Lexington Hills fire, and there was a lot of death and destruction in those events, and that takes its toll on you. But there were also good things that happened. I was at the Kincaid fire when we went from 189,000 people who were evacuated from their homes because they were at risk, and we let 184,000 of them go back home. And I was one of the people that got to help deliver that message. And they go home and they find that their home is still there because of the work that you and every other firefighter assigned to that fire did to save their homes. And you get to celebrate with them. So there's tragedy, but there's also a lot of good stuff that you get to see as a firefighter. In addition, I think being a firefighter has made me a better person. When I first went into the fire service, it was all about me. Truly it was. I was not the person I am today, because I have learned that it's very important to put other people first, to pay attention to their feelings and their desires before you take care of yourself. But when you do take care of yourself, you've got to do it well. So, like I said, a lot of tragedy, and there's a way to deal with that stuff. I don't think we need to get into that in this conversation, but you have to know if you're going into a career in the fire service, you're going to see people die. You're going to see people lose their homes. You're going to see a lot of tragedy, and you have to be willing to work to overcome the effect that that will have on your person.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to note. Even in this first course of fire science, which I'm taking, they note on that about how you have to be willing to accept help and recognize when the seeing that much tragedy has had its effect on you.
Yeah, being willing to accept help. That's true in very many aspects of life. Being willing to accept help.
Moving on to a more like somewhat negative note, can you think of any downsides or regrets that this career has caused you?
Yes. I missed a lot of holidays with my kids. I missed a lot of birthdays with my kids because I was working. And now I'm working in a vaccine clinic giving people COVID vaccines. I'm working 14-hour days sometimes 7 days a week. And I've been doing that since before Christmas. I don't get to spend a lot of time with my kids right now or the woman I'm dating. And that takes its toll on your interpersonal relations. But all of them understand how important it is, the work that I'm doing.
All right. Going back to a little bit more positive thing, in an average firehouse, what kind of different positions are available to a firefighter, and how would promotions work?
Okay, that's a good question. So when you get hired by San Jose, and again, I'm talking about just San Jose, some of this stuff goes true for other departments, but it's not completely true for other departments. So I'm just going to talk about San Jose Fire Department right now. When you get hired as a recruit firefighter, and day one of the academy, you're wearing a uniform, but you don't have a badge. And you will go through about 20 weeks of training in our academy. A lot of it's physical, a lot of it's academic, so you got to be able to do both. When you graduate, your uniform changes. You're no longer a recruit firefighter, you're a probationary firefighter, and you stay on probation for a year. Now, that firefighter could be an emergency medical technician, or they could be a paramedic, and the job they do is different based on their level of a medical training. After they've been a firefighter for 2 years, so 1 year on probation and then a second year, they can apply for promotion to becoming a fire engineer. The fire engineer is the person who drives the apparatus and runs the pump or raises the aerial ladder. So that's his job or her job. And we need to make it very clear. We need women in the fire service. As much as we need people who speak Spanish and Hindi and Russian and French and 47 other languages that are spoken in San Jose right now, we need women in the fire service. Right now in San Jose, it's about 2% of our population are women. We need more. We need to encourage women to apply. We need to encourage females in high school to consider that as a career path. Anyway, getting back to your question. After you're a fire engineer or a firefighter, either one of those can promote directly to captain. The captain is the person who is in charge of the company. That could be one vehicle or 2 vehicles, or one of our companies has even more vehicles than that. But that person is in charge of that local crew. Then from captain, you can promote to battalion chief. And the battalion chief is in charge of 6 to 8 stations, depending on which battalion, and all of the firefighters and fire engineers and captains that are in those stations. There are a couple of other ranks that we haven't talked about because they're not in the firehouse, so to speak. There's a fire prevention inspector. So above engineer, but below captain is the inspector. And that person works in the Bureau of Fire Prevention, inspecting buildings to make sure that they're safe. Because you're going to save more lives by preventing fires than you are by fighting fires. And then there is the arson investigator. That's a rank between inspector and captain. And that person does not wear a uniform usually. And they investigate suspicious fires and they prosecute arsonists. And then above the battalion chief, and that person is not in the fire station, is the deputy chief, the assistant chief, and the chief of the fire department.
So along the way of these different promotions, is there different educational requirements that students should keep in mind when going to school?
So to become a firefighter, a college degree is not required. It's recommended, but it's not required. If I wanted to promote to deputy chief today, I wouldn't be able to because I don't have a bachelor's degree. I've only got a 2-year degree. So I'm actually in the process of going back to school so I can get my bachelor's degree. And it would have been a whole lot easier for me if I'd done it when I first got out of high school and finished my bachelor's degree back then. But that would have been different than what I did, and it wouldn't put me where I am today. And I'm pretty happy with where I am today. But I do want to have the ability to promote. So having a college degree is one thing. On top of that, there are lots of specialty classes. In addition to my work as a fire captain paramedic, supervising other paramedics in the department, I had to become an infection control officer. I became a public information officer, which means I talk on camera. As a matter of fact, today I did an interview for Univision, and it'll probably be on the 11 o'clock news tonight. So I'm doing other classes like that. I've also taken about 500 hours of arson classes. So there's lots of education that you can get beyond normal schooling, but you have to build the foundation right now while you're in high school. And again, that's science, math, English, a foreign language, and physical fitness.
All right, I think that gives people a pretty good understanding. So you were talking earlier about emergency medicine, and so would you recommend prospective firefighters who are in community college right now to pursue a paramedic program before or after they become a firefighter?
Okay. In order to become a firefighter for San Jose, you have to, at the very minimum, be an emergency medical technician. In most junior colleges, that's 2 semesters. If you were to test for San Jose Fire and you had your college or your high school diploma, your driver's license, you were 18 years old and you had an EMT, the typical list you'd get on would have about 4,000 people on it. If you get your paramedic license, which is another 1.5 years on top of that, sometimes you can get a degree in paramedicine as well. There are some colleges locally that do that. But if you get your little blue and white card from the state that says you're a licensed paramedic, that list you're on goes from 4,000 people you're competing with to about 400 people. So it's much easier to get a job. And again, I'm talking just about San Jose, but after you get accredited as a paramedic, in other words, you've done all the firefighter stuff and you've done all the paramedic stuff, so you can do paramedicine while you're working for San Jose Fire Department, you make about $12,000 a year more just because you're a paramedic. So it is lucrative as well as making it easier for you to get the job.
Yeah, I think that's really good to point out. There's one person in my fire science class right now who's a paramedic with Santa Clara EMS who is now training to go into the fire service. And so that's what our professor was talking about, how that would increase the number of job opportunities as more fire calls shift from actual fires to medical emergencies.
Right. Like I said, 80% or more of what San Jose Fire does is run medical calls. And every one of those medical calls, we have to send at least one paramedic to. So every company has at least one paramedic on it. And if I were going to be sitting talking to somebody about how to plan their career out or the career path to becoming a firefighter, I would absolutely say get your paramedic before you start working on fire science classes or putting yourself through an academy. Get your paramedic and get some experience being a paramedic.
All right. Yeah, that's something I didn't realize before, but now I'll probably take that and see where that leads me.
Now,
Right.
don't get me wrong, becoming a paramedic is not an easy job. It's the equivalent of packing 4 years of nursing school into a year and a half.
All right. Moving on to a different question. What is it like to be ready around the clock on shift? And what is downtime like? I think you discussed this a little bit before, but just to kind of recap.
So during the day, like from 8 in the morning when you come on until about 5 o'clock in the evening, you're pretty much working constantly doing maintenance on the station, maintenance on the apparatus, taking care of your equipment, training, doing physical fitness, exercising. We're required to do that for 90 minutes every 24-hour shift that we're on. If you're a probationary firefighter, in the evening after dinner, you're going to be spending time studying. There's a lot to learn, and you have to take multiple tests in order to make it through your probation. So you don't get a bunch of downtime during the day. In the evenings, if you're not probationary, you could be sitting in the living room watching the TV. You could be on the computer studying. You could be playing video games. There's all kinds of stuff that you do at home that firefighters do in the station to wind down and have downtime. In the nighttime, you can go to bed and try to sleep. Everybody has a bed. It's their own bed. They got their own space. But you have to be ready to go run calls as soon as the bell rings. During the day, you have 1 minute to get dressed and get on the engine. During the nighttime, you've got 2 minutes because it takes longer to get out of bed and pull your pants on. But you have to go. There's no, I don't feel like it, I'm not going to go kind of thing. When the bell rings, you go. And that it can be very stressful for some people. I know when I was a new firefighter, I never could fall back asleep after running a call at night. I was up the rest of the night.
But what effect do you think that kind of sleep cycle has on you?
Well, for most people, it doesn't have much of a bad effect. Some people, the sleep deprivation or the interrupted sleep can cause some changes in their cardiac rhythms. Atrial fibrillation is attributed to that. It can also cause a lot of stress, and sleep deprivation can change the way you behave at home. So it's really important that you and your family recognize that if you're tired, you need to go get some sleep. Even if it's not a normal time for people to sleep, when you're off shift, you may spend the first day sleeping because you didn't sleep for 48 hours.
On that topic, what shift schedule does San Jose Fire Department use?
We use the 48-96 schedule. So you're on for 48 hours and then you're off for 96 hours, which is 4 days. So you get 4 days off out of every 6.
How long do people generally work in the fire service? Like, what's the general age of retirement?
So when I came on, it was traditional for most people to work full 30 years, max out their retirement plan, and then retire. That has changed now because we're working harder, and the typical firefighter is retiring after 25 years of service. Now, if you get hired at 21 and you work 25 years, you're 46, you could go do another career after that if you chose to. If you're like me and you get hired at the age of 38, when you finish your 30th year, I'll be 68 years old. So I probably won't take another career after the fire service.
All right. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you think would be important to someone considering a career in the fire service?
The most important thing to remember is customer service. And it's not all about the emergency that's happening. There was one time when I was taking a college chemistry class, and I showed up to class, and there's a note on the door of the classroom saying class was canceled. So I asked some other students, why is class canceled? And they said, well, I think the professor's wife had a stroke. And I'm allowed to talk about this for education because she gave me permission to. But I went to the hospital after texting his phone number and getting a response back from his daughter, and found out the story. He had been at home with his wife. She was walking through the living room. She collapsed onto the living room table, and it had a 300-pound glass top on it. She didn't break the glass top, but she knocked it off the table. There was a soda on the top of the table. It spilled to the floor. When the fire department got called, they went out there. They treated the patient. They got the patient to the hospital. She got the right medications, and it reversed all of the symptoms of the stroke. So by the time I saw her, she was completely symptom-free. She was able to talk. She was able to move her arms and all of that. But my professor went on to talk about afterwards. He didn't go back home until about midnight because he stayed in the hospital with his wife to make sure she was okay. When he got home, he thought he was going to have to pick up this 300-pound tabletop and clean the spilled soda up off the floor. And he didn't have to do any of that. When he got there, the firefighters had already put the tabletop back on, put the table back where it belonged. They cleaned up the mess on the carpet. They rinsed out the glass that had the soda in it, and it was sitting next to the kitchen sink. They didn't have to do any of that, but it was customer service. And that's the important part. Remember, 100% of what we do is about serving the people we're serving. If you're not in it to serve, if you're in it for the excitement, go find another job. You don't belong in the fire service.
Excellent. I think that was an awesome way to wrap up this little informational video. And thank you, Captain Matlow, for your time. I hope this helped a lot of students determine whether they really had that interest in the fire service and possibly join the San Jose Fire Department one day. Thank you.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.